Welcome everybody to Whitecloaks Real Ratings. As always, this data is the official Nielsen data. This is legitimate as it gets with no corporate spin on it. The trade-off for that legitimacy is that it comes out about a month late. This is the data for August 22nd to August 28th. The big story this week is of course the House of the Dragon premiere, which is a precursor to next week's face-off between House of the Dragon and Rings of Power. That conflict has serious potential to shake up the industry. So here goes. In a week when all the talk was about House of the Dragon, Netflix's Echoes pulled the top spot with 1.1 billion minutes viewed. It premiered the previous Friday with 524 million minutes watched, bringing its total up to 1.6 billion so far. With only 322 minutes of content, the show is doing very well for Netflix. The number 2 most streamed show of the week turned out to be Game of Thrones. Not Game of Thrones House of the Dragon, just old school Starks and Lannisters Game of Thrones. People excited for House of the Dragon flocked back for rewatches and put the show up to 909 million minutes over the course of the week. It speaks extremely well of the impact House of the Dragon is having for HBO. The number 3 most streamed show of the week was Stranger Things, which may never leave the top 10. It added another 890 million minutes. That brings the show's total up to 22.1 billion minutes since I've been recording the data, stretching its lead out massively. It's now only 18 billion minutes behind Squid Game as the most streamed season in streaming history. While it doesn't seem likely to pass Squid Game in the top 10, it may end up passing it sometime over the next 6 months in the margins. The number 4 most streamed show was House of the Dragon, which streamed for 741 million minutes. This data is all sorts of conflated, however. The show technically premiered last week at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, only 3 hours before the weekly cutoff, and in that time it was streamed for 327 million minutes. If you add those minutes onto this week's, the show is up to 1.06 billion minutes. I'll leave it up to the viewer to decide if they want to add that on. In addition, House of the Dragon also gets a bunch of minutes leached off it by people watching it on the HBO cable channel. 2.17 million people watched the premiere in week 1, and 2.26 million people watched in week 2. That viewership isn't captured in these minutes, so to veer conservatively, I've estimated that each of these viewers should be worth 30 minutes only, in which case House of the Dragon should pick up an additional 65 and 68 million minutes watched for these comparisons. I'll once again let the viewer decide if they think that House of the Dragon deserves the full hour for each television view. The Sandman came in at number 5 and added 681 million minutes watched. This brings the total of its release cycle up to 4.03 billion minutes. There's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not Sandman is going to get canceled, with a lot of insider whispers pointing to yes. The show had a budget of $165 million for the first season, which may be prohibitively expensive for Netflix, who seems to be in cost-cutting mode. Hulu's Only Murders in the Building came in at number 6 with 578 million minutes watched in its finale week. That pushed the season up to 3.6 billion minutes. That's up significantly from the show's first season of 2.6 billion minutes watched, and while there may be some inflation in this numbers due to rewatches, it's still a damn healthy growth figure for the only show on Hulu that anybody seems to watch. Only Murders in the Building made the top 10 in all 9 weeks of its release schedule, and over those 9 weeks is the only Hulu property to make the top 10. Lock and Key came in number 7 with 518 million minutes, putting it up to 2.2 billion for the season. While that's only about half the viewership numbers of Sandman, the show costs less than half to produce, which may keep Netflix happy with its performance. Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, came in at number 8, adding on 485 million minutes watched to an impressive 630 million last week. The documentary about Manti Te'o's fake online girlfriend was a bizarre look into one of the strangest sports stories of the last decade. With only 2 hours of content, Netflix has to be pleased with the per-minute performance of the Untold docuseries, which continues to do great work. Virgin River held on to the number 9 spot with 471 million minutes watched. That puts the season up to 8.5 billion minutes in total. A brilliant performance for the Netflix original. While it seems unlikely it will make the 9 billion minutes in the top 10, a soft 2 weeks may see it break the milestone. Never Have I Ever came in at number 10 with 433 million minutes watched. That brings it up to 1.9 million minutes since release. It seems unlikely it will be back next week, but even 2 billion minutes for a low-budget teenage rom-com has to make Netflix quite happy. Nielsen records a bunch of different lists. They break their top 10 lists up into original shows, acquired shows, and movies. Generally speaking, nobody bothers to talk about acquired shows because the same old shows are there every week. Things like NCIS, Grey's Anatomy, and Friends are what makes up the acquired show list. However, Nielsen made a decision about Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon that many will deem controversial. They decided that HBO Max acquired Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon from HBO, and so those shows appear on their acquired list. I don't agree with that decision. In order to give fair and accurate numbers, I've moved Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon into the original show category. But because I've done this, we now have the data for the number 11 and number 12 shows this week. She-Hulk came in number 11 with 390 million minutes. It got a second week bump, and I expect it to fall back down to the low 300s next week. But congratulations to Disney Plus for making the list for the first time since July 17th. They don't really deserve the spot, but because we have the data, I'm providing it anyway. Glow Up Season 4 came in at number 12 with 336 million minutes, and I don't really have anything to add about this. This will be the end of the August reporting month. Next week, we'll cover August 29th to September 4th, which will count for the August numbers, and this will include the Rings of Power. The biggest winners for August were also the biggest winners for July. Stranger Things added 4.3 billion minutes watched, while Virgin River added 3.4 billion, both on top of extremely impressive totals. Only Murders in the Building added 1.8 billion minutes, far better than anything on Hulu typically does. Untold, with 1.1 billion minutes watched on only 2 hours of content, was also a huge winner. The biggest losers for the month of August were Amazon Prime's The League of Their Own remake, which managed only 2 weeks in the top 10, didn't crack a billion minutes watched, and finished with an underwhelming 4.4 on Metacritic. It sounds like somehow this show is going to get a second season, however that may be contingent on how Rings of Power does and the fallout that has with Amazon Studios. Disney's She-Hulk also disappointed by being the first MCU show to not make the top 10 in its premiere week, and having only 390 million minutes in the top 10 in its first 2 weeks. While I suspect She-Hulk will beat out Ms. Marvel over the course of its run, at the moment it looks like it's firmly locked in as the second least watched MCU show. Maybe the most shocking failure of all seems to be Sandman, where if the rumors are true, it might get cancelled despite having 4 billion minutes watched. This would be a shocking wake-up call to the industry that streaming budgets need to be brought back in line with business expectations. I hope you all enjoyed the content. The Whitecloaks will be bringing these back every week.